Part 1 of The Birth of Professional Rugby League in Australia. Selections from the Sydney Morning Herald, 1907 to 1908. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A professional All Blacks team to tour the northern counties of England. 28th of May to the 5th of August 1907. Tuesday, 28th of May 1907. New professional football team. Promoter expelled. Wellington, Monday. A representative of the Wellington Post has been informed on good authority that an all-black team of rugby footballers, which are going home to play the English Northern Union clubs, are not being organised by any speculative syndicate. The players are financing themselves, although they have been offered outside financial assistance if required. It is stated that the prominent representative players invited to join the party have, with few exceptions, consented to make the trip. It is also stated that a public announcement would have been made some time ago, but for the fact that too many players were offering. The team will now probably leave in July. The management committee of the New Zealand Rugby Union tonight expelled and disqualified Baskerville of Wellington, who is understood to be the promoter of the proposed professional tour in England. At a meeting of the Council of the New South Wales Rugby Union last night, the following motion was carried: that this Council convey to the New Zealand Rugby Union its hearty appreciation of the action taken in reference to the suggested visit of a professional team to England, being of the opinion that such action is in the best interests of the game. Friday, 31st May. Professionalism in New Zealand. The proposal to send a New Zealand professional team of footballers to England to play the Northern Union clubs has naturally provoked a good deal of discussion in local rugby circles. The first aspect which strikes the members of the New South Wales Rugby Union is the effect the movement will have on the representative character of the team to come in a few weeks from New Zealand to Australia. If the team for England is to be strong, and it is not much use for them to go as a speculation if not, then they will need to include a number of the leading players, and in this respect it is significant, though of course not conclusive, that in the North Island team to meet the South Island there are no Auckland players included. Developments in New Zealand will be followed with great interest in Australia. Cable to London. Wellington, New Zealand, Thursday. The New Zealand Rugby Union has decided to cable its representative on the English Union to discountenance the proposal regarding the professionals' visit to England. Saturday, 1st of June. Professionalism in New Zealand. It was cabled that leading footballers in New Zealand were called upon to sign a declaration that their amateur status was in no way jeopardised by the present professional movement before they would be chosen for the North Island versus South Island match. The following is a copy of the declaration. I, of do solemnly and sincerely declare as follows. 1. That I have never asked, received, or relied on, promised, direct or implied, to receive any money consideration whatever, actual or prospective, for playing football, or rendering any service to a football organisation. 2. And particularly, that I have not asked, received, or relied on any promise, direct or implied, to receive any money consideration whatever, actual or prospective, or to receive any benefit from, nor have I promised or asked to be permitted to take part in any manner whatsoever in a scheme having for its object the sending of a team of rugby footballers from New Zealand to play football against the teams of the Northern Counties Rugby Union of England. And I make this solemn declaration conscientiously believing the same to be true, under and by virtue of the provisions of an Act of the General Assembly of New Zealand, intituled The Justices of the Peace Act, 1882. This will have to be signed before a player's claim to inclusion in the teams is even considered. An undertaking wanted. It was resolved also that each player selected for the North vs South Island match shall be required to give the following undertaking: I, in consideration of the New Zealand Rugby Football Union having selected me to be one of its representatives to take part in the match, North Island vs South Island, on June 3rd, 1907, do hereby promise and agree with the said Union: 1. That I will not form one of the projected team of footballers which is to leave New Zealand to play against the northern counties of England. 2. That I will not enter into any negotiations with any person with a view to my becoming a member of any such team. 3. That I will not actively or passively be a party to, or assist in any way, the promotion of any such team. 4. That if I am approached by any person or persons with a request that I should become a member of any such team, I shall at once notify the said Union of the fact, and advise the said Union of the name of any person or persons so approaching me. 5. That I will, to the best of my ability, assist the said Union in its desire to put down any attempt to induce any footballer in New Zealand to make a breach of the rules as to professionalism as adopted by the Rugby Football Union, and to this end will give the said Union all information bearing on the subject of the said projected tour to England. Saturday, 8th of June. Reception of visiting team. Professionalism. The Queensland team to meet New South Wales today were formally welcomed at noon yesterday in the rooms of the New South Wales Rugby Union, Bligh Street. The chair was occupied by Mr. J. J. Calvert, President of the Union, and he had on his right Mr. F. C. Lee, manager of the visiting team, and Mr. C. J. Wade, Attorney General, on his left. Mr. M. Dorr, the Queensland captain, and Mr. Richard Teese, chairman of the Sydney Cricket Ground Trust. The chairman said that it was with the greatest pleasure that he welcomed the Queensland team, who were not only game but generous foes. He was quite sure that the match on the morrow would be honestly and fairly contested, and he expressed the hope that the better side would win. Speaking of the professional movement in New Zealand, he feared the taint of professionalism and hoped that the two states now represented would set their foot against it. One great advantage rugby had over the association game in England was the absence of professionalism. When it was introduced, there would come the danger of gambling. Applause. Mr. C. G. Wade, Attorney General, was exceedingly pleased to be present to join as the official representative of the state in the welcome to the visitors. The Government felt an active and warm appreciation and interest in all manly sports, and were prepared to give all these games every encouragement. In the present professional movement elsewhere, there was a danger of amateurism being dismantled. One of the banes of football in the old country was the encroachment of professionalism. In the north of England, where professional rugby held sway, the higher aspects of the game were completely lost. With a large amount of money in one pocket, there would probably be a larger amount of blue metal in the other. Laughter. He hoped here the amateur status would always be maintained. We were on the eve of a football carnival. In the matches against Queensland, New Zealand, and the combined Australia against New Zealand, there should be exhibitions of the game which should raise the standard of the game in the colonies. He hoped the weather would clear up, and if so there would be a large and festive gathering, and he hoped the better side would win. The old cry of win, tie or wrangle should be confined to school grounds. It was the men who could play a combined game of football, of working towards a common aim, who went to build up a young country like ours, and in doing so they were increasing the good name of Australia and England wherever they went. Applause. Mr. C. W. Oakes, M.L.A., said that the game had gone ahead by leaps and bounds. He looked forward to the time when, on that historic arena, there would be played possibly matches between Australian teams and England, America and France. There was the mirage of professionalism on the horizon of football, but he was pleased to see that from the men selected for New Zealand it was only a mirage, for the cream of New Zealand football was coming over to Australia. Mr. Richard Teese said that as certainly the oldest Australian footballer present, he was pleased to assist in the welcome to the visitors. He had watched the progress of the game since he had taken part in the formation of the first football club in Sydney 42 years ago. He had seen the game develop, and had noted the extraordinary hold it had upon the public taste, and had seen the enormous attendances. He, however, added a note of warning to footballers to carry on the game in such a way as to make the play interesting. There was too much umpire's whistle, and the game was not open enough. He was surprised to find so much faulty kicking at goal. 11 successive tries were failures, and it was only on the 12th occasion that a goal was kicked. That was not creditable. He referred to the danger of professionalism to this game, which was the only one free from the bane of the pot hunter. The first attempt at professionalism had met with a formidable rebuff. The toast was received with musical honours. Mr. F. C. Lee, the manager of the Queensland team, said that though he had frequently been to Sydney in other capacities, this was his first visit as manager, and that he was particularly pleased to hold the position, for this was the celebration of the silver wedding of the two unions. As Mr. Lee rose to speak, the sun shone brightly, and he accepted that as a happy augury for a fine day for the match. He did not think there was any local danger of professionalism. He paid a high tribute to the memory of Mr. P. M. Lane, who, Mr. Lee said, had been greatly appreciated in Queensland. Cheers. Mr. Dorr, captain, also responded. He said that they had come down to win. Mr. R. A. Arnold proposed the visitors, and in doing so mentioned the fact that there were present Mr. Belson, who was a member of the Reverend Mr. Mullinow's team, Mr. Allen, who had played for Ireland versus Scotland, and Mr. Gordon from Western Australia. Cheers. Mr. Edwards of the Sports Ground responded on behalf of the visitors. Mr. H. D. Wood proposed the toast of the President, to which Mr. J. J. Calvert responded. Saturday, 15th of June. Professional movement in New Zealand. Files to hand from New Zealand state that inquiries made by the Star elicited the fact that the professional football team will visit England and play Northern Counties as originally arranged. The combination will be a strong one, including a large proportion of the All-Black team. The Aucklanders who signed the declaration required by the Rugby Union are understood to have taken legal advice before doing so, and were informed that it would not make them subject to any legal liability in the event of their taking place in the professional tour. 3 or 4 Aucklanders known to be going with the professional team are amongst the foremost players in the colony. Though their names are known, they are at present withheld from publication. The team is due to arrive in England about September the 6th. Thursday, 27th of June. Professional rugby team, Australians to be included. Wellington, Wednesday. The professional rugby team will leave New Zealand for England after the return of the New Zealand representative team from Australia. The professionals include several members of the visiting team. An effort will be made to strengthen the back division from Australia. Friday, 28th of June. Professionalism in rugby football. Will it come? The cabled information from New Zealand published in yesterday's issue has created quite a scare in local football circles. It was stated that the New Zealand team, shortly to leave for Australia, would include some of the All-Black professional combination to visit England and play matches against clubs in the Northern Union. The public were to a certain extent prepared for this by the statement published in the Herald and taken from a New Zealand exchange that legal advice had been obtained to the effect that there was nothing to stop anybody from signing the declaration put before New Zealand players. Still, the information received yesterday did come as a surprise. It was thought that despite that statement, it was hardly likely that the New Zealand Rugby Union would ask for signatures to a declaration which was valueless. Now it is cabled that the team to whose visit Australians have anxiously looked forward will have the taint of professionalism, and this will cause an uncomfortable feeling, to say the least of it, amongst the public and the governing body. A more important statement cabled is that the New Zealanders hope to strengthen their backs by the inclusion of some Sydney players. Upon this matter a prominent member of the New South Wales Rugby Union, and one who has New Zealand's football matters at his fingertips, is of the opinion that there is nothing at all in the statement. In the first place, he thinks it is hardly likely that the All Blacks to visit England will do anything that could question their right to be All Blacks. They are going to England on the reputation gained by the recent All Black team. As far as he knows, no advances have been made to any of the local players. Probably the statement has been made over there with an object. Anyhow, it is a high compliment to New South Wales players to say that their inclusion will strengthen the New Zealand team for England. He is emphatic in his opinion that the New Zealanders would be the last people to attempt it. As to the contract signed in New Zealand, the position taken up by the New Zealand Rugby Union was not at all tenable from a legal point of view. Perhaps the object of sending forth a rumour that some Sydney players would join the team is to cast a stigma amongst the sport-loving public upon the games to be shortly played here. However, it comes with a good deal of surprise that such a report should get about. Another well-known authority remarked that he was told by one of the All Black team on their return from England that within 12 months he would be back in England playing for one of the northern clubs. As to the question of professionalism in football or in any other sport, a great deal has been written and said. Up to the present moment it has been unknown in football in Australasia. There have been statements that players have received money, but they have not been substantiated. The majority of the members of the two rugby governing bodies are determined to use every effort to stamp out any sign of professionalism in Sydney, and the same feeling exists in Queensland. The wish is probably father to the thought that professionalism will not, at any rate for some years, take root here, but it may be found before many years, perhaps months, have passed by, that severe action is necessary. Perhaps in a few years we shall find amateurs and professionals playing side by side in football teams, just as they do at cricket and at golf. There are some games in which the professional has raised the standard of the game, notably in the two branches of sport mentioned, and there are some who take a prominent part in local football who see that the professional is bound to come. Saturday, 29th of June. Professionalism in Rugby. Wellington, New Zealand, Friday. Mr. Baskerville, Secretary of the New Zealand professional team, has stated that there is no truth in the rumour that George Smith of Auckland, the All Black 3/4, has been offered the captaincy of the professional team to visit England. He also denied the report that Australia was being looked to for backs. More good New Zealand backs than are required have offered, in some cases voluntarily, to go home if finally selected. Wednesday, 17th of July. New Zealand professional team. Wellington, New Zealand, Tuesday. The professional rugby team will leave New Zealand for London direct about the third week in August. Saturday, 20th of July. New Zealand professionals. English tour abandoned. Proposed matches in Australia. Wellington, Friday. It is stated here that the idea of dispatching a New Zealand professional rugby team to England at the end of this month has been dropped on account of the proposals made to the New Zealand professional team from Australia, which may lead to a series of matches being played in the Commonwealth. Private advice has been received in Wellington to the effect that a professional rugby union, designed to affiliate with the English Northern Rugby Union, is being formed in Sydney. Mr. Baskerville, the On-Secretary of the New Zealand Football Club, declines to say more than that he had been cognisant of the fact for some time past. A few Australian enthusiasts have made a proposal to him regarding the New Zealand professional team playing in Sydney on the way to England. Negotiations are still proceeding, and if the guarantees and assurances were satisfactory, no doubt the Australian public would be afforded an opportunity of seeing the All Black professionals play. Tuesday, 23rd July. New Zealand professional team. 54 players offered. The New Zealand Sporting and Dramatic Review of July the 11th says, "The team for the English tour was selected at the end of last week in Wellington. There were 4 selectors, 1 each from Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. Between 50 and 60 names came up for consideration, and 54 signed agreements were received from players willing to participate in the tour. The team took a considerable time to pick, and amongst others the claims of 4 All Blacks were considered and ultimately passed over. One of the principal qualifications dwelt upon was the general excellence of character of the players willing to go, and a couple of New Zealand's best-known footballers were omitted from the final selection for this reason. Ultimately, 25 of the finest players in the colony were selected. Auckland will be more strongly represented than any other centre, 9 men being included from the northern city. General arrangements. The New Zealand Rugby Union may endeavour to circumvent the crisis by delaying the present team in Australia for an extra week, in the hope of putting a stopper on the departure of the members of the professional team at present playing with the New Zealand representative team on tour. This, however, will not have any serious effect on the professionals, as they will leave Sydney for London direct immediately the present Australian tour is completed. The meeting last week in Wellington drew up a drastic set of rules to ensure the thorough well-behaviour of the team when at home. The financial aspect. The contention that the tour will not be a financial success is a mere bogey. Besides the £3,000 deposited to the team's account in London, £1,300 will be subscribed by members of the team, each man putting in £50. In 1 or 2 cases that amount, which is looked upon as a guarantee, was not forthcoming, but others have placed double that sum to their credit, and the selection committee which met in Wellington last week had close on the full amount, £1,300, at their disposal. The 25 members of the team share alike in the profits, and take 70% of the proceeds of every match. A management committee will be appointed by the players to look after all the inner workings. It is evident that when a single club in the Northern Union was able to average £750 per match in gate money for its last 10 matches, there is not much need for anxiety on the part of the professionals as to the monetary success of their venture. The first match. The team leaves next month, immediately after the completion of the Australian tour. The first match will be played on October the 6th, and though the programme of matches has not yet been received, 27 matches will be played. The team will be known as the New Zealand football team. Friday, 2nd of August. Professional team, 160 applicants. Matches in Australia. Wellington, New Zealand, Thursday. The professional rugby team will play a match in Paris on the way to England. An invitation has also been accepted to play at California on the return journey. 160 applications were received for places in the team. The selected members will assemble in Sydney, where 3 matches will be played, followed probably by others in Melbourne and Adelaide. Mr. J.C. Gleeson, of Napier, has been appointed playing manager. Monday the 5th of August. Professional rugby. The fact that the agricultural ground has been engaged for 3 matches against the New Zealand professional team shortly to visit England was on Saturday discussed in those places where rugby contests were played. Everyone was asking everyone what sort of a team would be got together to meet the professional team. Judging by the applications which were received by the promoters in New Zealand, and the fact that several members of the All Blacks team now here are going to join the combination for England as soon as the closing engagement is played next Saturday, the promoters do not anticipate much difficulty in getting together here 3 teams to take part in wind-raising matches. There is a lot of difference, however, between players boldly announcing themselves as members of the team for England and in forming combinations to meet in 2 or 3 engagements. The prospect of a division of the gate may induce a few of our leading players to break through their amateur status, though such division would be almost for a certainty on the small side. There has been, however, a greater power of persuasion at work. New South Welshmen have been led to believe that if they play against the professionals and show good enough form, they will have a chance of inclusion in the 25 who visit England. Still, the title of the combination is the New Zealand football team, and it seems hardly feasible that the representative character of the side would be departed from to any marked extent. The air is full of rumours, and though some of them are bound to be correct, there is not much likelihood of anything tangible being known until after the final test match. On the strength of remarks dropped by officials in high authority, there is a feeling amongst a number of our players strongly in favour of professionalism, and it is only necessary for some guiding spirit to take up the matter for quite a large number of our present players to follow the lead. Another whose advice has been for long respected in the councils of the game fails to see why any harm must necessarily follow in the wake of such a movement. It is a big question, and is one that will cause a great deal of heart-burning before it is settled. As to what shape that settlement will take is at present a matter of speculation. Supporters of professionalism ask why should we not have the amateur and the professional appearing together for the one side. They contend that there should be no reason why a governing body should not have control over him who plays for simple amusement and, at the same time, over him who accepts a fee. The local unions will, of course, work tooth and nail against the introduction of the professional. If he ever did become an established fact, under the control of the New South Wales Rugby Union, it would mean, of course, the cutting of the thread which binds the New South Wales daughter to the English parent. Indeed, there is no knowing what it would mean in the world's rugby. Mr. J. Giltinan, a gentleman well known in another branch of sport, is, it is understood, taking an active part in making the arrangements for the matches, and, if rumours speak truly, some success has been met with in regard to one or two captains of first-grade teams. Mr. Giltinan has officiated as a cricket umpire in representative matches. Messenger's inclusion denied. Brisbane, Sunday. There was a widely circulated rumour in Brisbane on Saturday that Messenger, the brilliant New South Wales three-quarter, had been invited and had accepted an invitation to join the professional rugby team which is about to leave New Zealand for England to play a series of matches there against clubs playing under the rules and auspices of the Northern Union. Messenger was interviewed tonight, and the rumour brought under his notice. "There is nothing in it as far as I'm concerned," said Messenger. "I have had no communication with or from the organisers of the team. The rumour that I have joined the team is untrue, and you may contradict it flatly." Asked as to the attitude of the New South Wales players, Messenger said that as far as he knew, none of them had been approached with a view to inducing them to take part in the professional venture. Even amongst the All Blacks who were in Brisbane for the past 10 days or more, he understood there was no definite knowledge of the names of the New Zealand players who had been chosen to join the team. End of Part 1. Part 2 of The Birth of Professional Rugby League in Australia. Selections from the Sydney Morning Herald, 1907 to 1908. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Wave of Discontent, 6th of August. Tuesday, 6th of August, 1907. Rugby football. A wave of discontent. MRU administration. Eruption of professionalism. New league forming. It would seem that the formation of a New Zealand professional football team was all that was needed to fan into flame a smouldering discontent in our own rugby world. There is decidedly trouble abroad today, and already a struggle between amateur and professional football may be said to have been entered upon. Interviews in various quarters yesterday elicited the fact that there have been murmurings against the administration of the Metropolitan Rugby Union for some time, the players objecting to that body amassing huge balances, while they themselves, the instruments of the amassing, were allowed to be out of pocket in regard to various matches. When the news was passed round that the New Zealand professional team wanted matches here, the state of local feeling was clearly demonstrated in the fact that, at the risk of disqualification from the amateur unions, a large number of first-class players volunteered to represent this state. This gave the secessionists something tangible to work on, and a professional union or league — it is already spoken of as the Rugby League of New South Wales — is now regarded as a certainty. One prominent figure in the new movement declares unequivocally that 6 first-class teams will be playing under the league next year. On the other hand, the MRU officials, while admitting an undercurrent of discontent, do not view the advent of professionalism with alarm, believing that the public will not support it, and that it will speedily work itself out. The secessionists are careful to explain that professional football here will not be like the professional football in England, where a man can earn his living at the game. Here it is intended to ensure the players against accident, pay their playing and training expenses, and "perhaps make them a bonus at the end of the season according to results." It is claimed that under such an arrangement the players will be no more professionals than our international cricketers, and that they will be doing openly and above board far less than is being done in the matter of payments to players already. It is further urged that the standard of football will be raised by reason of the players taking it more seriously and training more solidly. As one advocate says, it will be the survival of the fittest. But the amateurs hold that with the game on a purely money basis, it must degenerate, as all games have done in the circumstances, and that if professional football got the upper hand, incalculable harm from a rugby point of view would be done among the young players, who are now looked to recruit the first-class ranks. The thing can't last. A MRU official's view. Mr. J. A. Peyton, Secretary of the Eastern Suburbs Club and a member of the Management Committee of the Metropolitan Rugby Union, in the course of conversation with a Herald representative yesterday, said that he was afraid there was at present among the players a strong undercurrent of feeling in favour of professionalism. The big gate money appeared to be responsible for it. Personally, Mr. Peyton could see a good deal in the matter from a professional point of view. If a man were a champion footballer, and he thought that he could make more money of it than at anything else, should he not be entitled to earn it if the professional game could be properly organised? At the same time, he was emphatically of the opinion that professional football would ruin the sport. It would cease to be a game in the accepted sense, and would go the way of all sports that money had controlled in this country. He for one would decidedly have nothing to do with it. "There has been some mention of our union taking over both forms of the game. That, of course, is altogether impossible. The moment we had anything to do with professionalism, we would sever all connections with the English and New Zealand unions, so we daren't do it. However," Mr. Peyton went on to say, "I don't think there is as much to be feared from the movement as some imagine. I really do not think that professional football could last here. We have not the population to support it, for one thing, even if the public did throw over the amateurs, and I don't think they would do that. The best year the Union ever had was last year, when there was a profit of £2,500. Now we have 11 clubs, and allowing even only 20 players for each, you see that would mean that 220 players would have to be provided for. Divide £2,500 up between 220, and see what an absurd amount per man it would give for the season. And I'm afraid that they would be a long time before they had such an amount to divide. Even granting excellent patronage, professional football could not be run as cheaply as the amateur game, and you may depend upon it, if the whole thing were a purely money affair, the grounds would demand a good deal more than they ask of us. No, I guess the thing won't last. The public will stick to the amateurs even if they didn't give them the best football. There will not be sufficient money in it, and, furthermore, the scheme will eventually break down for want of players. As with every man for himself and the money he can make, not sufficient attention will be paid to the young players, certainly not nearly as much as the MRU devotes to them now. At the same time, whether the thing is destined to failure or success, said Mr. Peyton in conclusion, it seems certain that a number of men will go over to the new body if it is formed, and among them will be several first-class players. Come to stay. More liberality and better football. Mr. J. Giltinan, who has in hand the arrangements in connection with the forthcoming visit of the New Zealand team, is confident that professional football is coming to stay. You can take it for certain that next year will see 6 teams playing under the Rugby League of New South Wales, he declared emphatically. To suggest that the thing can't last, he went on to say, is absurd. The very best rugby in England is being played professionally, and when we link up with New Zealand and England, there will be far more interesting games to be witnessed than at present. There can be no doubt that professional football will be the better game, for the simple reason that the players will have to take it very seriously, and see to it that they are in absolutely the very best condition to do any good at it at all. Of course, Mr. Giltinan continued, what will be called professionalism here will not be anything like what is so termed in England. In the old country, the professional footballer can absolutely live on the game, but he won't be able to do that here. As a matter of fact, it will be no more strictly professional than our international amateur cricket of today. We shall simply see to it that a man's expenses shall be paid in connection with each match, and not let him be put seriously out of pocket, as is often the case with players from the ranks of working men under the niggardly policy of the MRU. And at the end of each season, the players will probably be given bonuses according to the results achieved in the matter of gate money. There will be no piling up of great balances and the buying of racecourses, while the men who share the gates are allowed actually to be at a loss. That is the crux of the whole position, and the MRU has only itself to blame for the turn events are taking. At the same time, it is going to be all the better from the point of view of the public, for as I say, the new professionalism must make for a decidedly higher standard of play. Mr. Giltinan was questioned in regard to the team to play against the professional New Zealanders, but refused to be drawn as to the personnel of the New South Wales team. All I can say is this, he said. We have had enough applications for inclusion to turn out 3 teams, and you may take it as a fact that they are not the worst men who have applied. The team will go into quarters on the 10th, and will thenceforward do nothing but prepare for the first match on the 17th, and I think I may confidently say that for that match, as in those on the 21st and 24th, the public will be treated to as fine an exhibition of real football as has been seen in the state. The MRU criticised. A fair deal wanted. Turn professional, said the secretary of one of the most powerful teams in the competition, when asked if his men would join the professional movement. Why, the boys would turn anything so long as they got a bit better deal than they are getting from the Metropolitan Union. Why shouldn't they get something out of the game besides kicks? You take it from me, if the right men start this professional movement in Sydney, they will get nearly every man playing in the union competitions. Of course it doesn't do to mention names at present, but I can tell you that every member of my club will go over. Not that the boys want to be paid for their Saturday afternoon's fun, but they think, and rightly so too, that as they draw the crowd, they should get something out of the gate money. What do they get? Well, it will surprise the many thousands who fight their way into the cricket ground to see the big matches, to know what the champions who sport the light blue Guernseys receive in return for the hard training they have to undergo and the hard knocks they have to contend with. To begin with, when a man joins a club, he has to pay his entrance fee of 5 shillings. Then he has to buy his own outfit. If he lives at North Sydney and his team is playing at the cricket ground, he has to pay his own fare to reach the place where thousands pay their shillings to see him and his club mates play. Up till a month ago, if he got hurt during the match and was unable to work, that was his lookout. He would perhaps get a couple of guineas from the union, while any other support would have to come from his club mates, who would organise concerts to raise funds. Under extreme pressure, that was altered a month ago, when the medical fund was started. Now a man gets all his doctor's fees paid, and receives £1 a week while he is incapacitated. That's a fine lot anyhow to risk your limbs for. At the start of the season, each club gets £30 for training expenses. Why, with 3 grades going, that hardly buys embrocations. Thank goodness the players are taking a tumble to it now, and next season you'll see something different. The union officials see the change coming too. That's why they bought Epping. They saw that the men who made the sport were going to try and get some of the returns, and perhaps some of the thousands the union had tied up, so they straight away purchase Epping, and in so doing sink all their reserve, and leave a tidy lot to be paid off in future years. They have been very clever, but before the matter has been fixed up they will find that they have bitten off more than they can chew. Nothing new. Professionalism rife now. "What do you think of the new movement?" was asked the secretary of one of the leading metropolitan clubs by a representative of the Herald yesterday. "What new movement?" was the inquiry. "The professional movement in local football," was the reply. "Why, bless my soul," was the retort, "you are green. That's no new movement. We've had professionalism in Sydney football for years. Everybody knows it. All the club officials know it. The union knows it, but they can't prove it, and to save trouble they don't try much. Why, nearly every club pays directly or indirectly for the services of one or two men every Saturday, and I don't blame them. Take an instance. Suppose we've got a rattling good forward. He might be a butcher or a grocer and can't get off on Saturday afternoon. Are we going to lose his services when we can get them by putting another man on in his place in the shop at the cost of 5 shillings? Not much. We pay the dollar and our forward plays. I call that fair, but there are cases where some players get half a sovereign for the game. Of course, there's no receipt given, and no one sees the passing of the money, but still it's pretty well known that several players aren't in the game for pure sport. There's a case I know of. One club wanted forwards pretty badly, and 2 members of another team were approached to see if they would throw in their lot with the team that wanted them. They said they would come if they could get a good job in the district. The good job was secured for the men, who would have got an advance of 7 shillings a week on the wages they were earning. But just as they were about to transfer, they backed out, and kept their old jobs, saying it paid them better to stick at their old club than to take a rise of 7 shillings and leave the district. Who was going to pay the 7 shillings? The club, of course. A plea for professionalism. "I think by next year there will be 7 or 8 professional football clubs in Sydney," said Mr. Lewis G. Abrams, one of the delegates from the Glebe Club to the Metropolitan Union, when asked his opinion as to the prospects of the professional movement in New South Wales. Mr. Abrams, who is known as the father of electoral football, is strongly in favour of a change. "There is no reason," he said, "why football clubs in which there are professional players should not exist here the same as they do in England. I see no difference in playing football for payment to playing cricket for money. The thing could be very easily managed," he continued. "There should be a New South Wales Rugby Football League formed. In the metropolis they could form about 8 district clubs. Membership should be confined to bona fide residents of districts, the same as at present, and before long there would be a strong competition going. The league should govern the sport and manage the matches, and the proceeds, after deducting certain expenses, should be divided amongst the competing clubs pro rata. Professionalism was not so bad as people wanted to make it out. Alec Bannerman and Howell were professionals, and nobody thought any the less of them for it. It was far better, he thought, to be a straight-out professional than an amateur who, with his bill of expenses, got 3 times as much as the despised professional. He would like to see professional football introduced, and it would then be the survival of the fittest. Professionalism went very well in cricket, and it should prove satisfactory in football. There was more reason for a football player to be a professional than a cricketer, for he ran a lot more risks, and under present conditions he only got £1 a week if he was unable to work through accidents. In his opinion, the union was responsible for the strong support the professional movement was receiving. If they had not been so niggardly with their funds, and had treated the players a little more liberally, the players would have shown more loyalty. Under the present state of affairs, the players, by joining the professional movement, were losing little with a chance of gaining much. He could not say whether football would be improved by the introduction of the new system, but he felt satisfied that the men would pay more attention to their training, seeing that it was a matter of pounds, shillings and pence to them. Besides encouraging those playing at present, payment would bring forward many men who could not afford to risk their limbs merely for the sport. He did not think the game was likely to suffer by the introduction of professionalism. Football was not like pedestrianism. 1 or 2 men could not sell a match. There would of course be an effort made by the strongest clubs to get all the best men, but this would have to be guarded against by the league rules. The professional movement had been anticipated by the Union, he continued, and for fear the clubs next year would vote themselves some of the accumulated funds, they decided to remove the temptation by sinking the money in purchasing Epping Racecourse. Asked if he would be connected with the new movement, Mr. Abrams replied, "My services are not required by the amateurs, and if I am requested, I may do something for the professionals." Local unions responsible. Mean and niggardly policies. Purchase of Epping condemned. Little better than a foul yard. I think the two unions, by their treatment of the players, have themselves very largely to blame for the professional spirit which is manifesting itself in rugby, said a gentleman prominently connected with one of the unions. Our Cricket Association, he went on to say, recompenses the players for loss of salary, and recognition of the principle that it is only a matter of justice that this should be done has not detrimentally affected the game here in any way whatever. In England, the professional cricketer plays along with the amateur, with the result that the standard of the game has been very considerably raised. Similarly, I see no reason why a footballer here, who considers he should be paid for his services, should not be allowed to take part in a match with another whom circumstances have placed above such necessity. It must not be forgotten that the young men who take part in football must be of the strong, burly kind, and necessarily a large proportion of these must come from the working class. The game is a hard one, and there are plenty of hazards and hard knocks connected with it. A man may get badly injured, and may be laid up for weeks or months, and all he may receive is a few shillings a day for a certain time for his loss of work. Then, too, the manner in which our representatives are treated when away on tour has aroused a feeling among them that they are not being anything like fairly dealt with. Take, for instance, the present team away in Western Australia. By the time it comes back here, it will have been away some weeks, and can any reasonable man say that 3 shillings a day is a fair remuneration for men, many of whom have nothing but their hard-earned wages to depend on? It might be said that if they cannot afford the time or loss of money, they should not make the trip, but if that principle were acted upon, it would eventually be a serious blow to our great winter game. Besides that, it would be very humiliating if a man's position prevented him from representing his state when called upon to do so. Given a firm controlling body who would see that the greedy gambling spirit was kept out of the sport, and I see no reason why a man's services should not be paid for, either by his club or state. Of course, so far as recompensing a man for loss of salary is concerned, it would be necessary to draw a line somewhere, but as a broad general principle I fail to see there is anything dangerous about it. But so far as the clubs are concerned, are they in a position to pay for the services of any of their men? Would there not have to be some arrangement with the Union about the ground receipts? Were the next questions asked. That is so, was the reply, and I think it would be a very good thing for the clubs if a certain percentage of the takings were handed over to them. There is no doubt that it is a very sore point with many that the Metropolitan Union has thousands of pounds sunk in investments, and they want to know why the clubs at least should not receive some portion of the proceeds which the public pay to see the different matches. Has the purchase of the Epping ground by the Metropolitan Union given rise to any dissatisfaction? Yes, was the answer, not only because the ground by many is looked upon as unsuitable, but also because it is regarded as a move on the part of the Union to sink a large sum of money which might otherwise tempt some of the clubs to ask for a share of it. Personally, I think it's a bad business transaction, for the place is little better than a foul yard. Where do you think people will prefer to go when having the choice of other places such as Wentworth Park, University Oval or the Sydney Cricket Ground? Besides, people can see better from the outside without paying than they can inside. Again, it will cost thousands of pounds to put in a proper condition to accommodate the spectators, and even when that is done, I doubt if the place will ever find favour with those who, for the time being, may patronise it. There is another point, however, I should like to refer to. Last season, notwithstanding the visits of teams to the country, the Association had a net profit of over £2,300. Would it not be a good thing on the part of the Union if it set apart, say, £2,000 of this, and said in effect to one of the clubs, We will give you this so that you can set about getting a ground in your own district. I think this a matter which should engage the serious consideration of the Union. Most of the outside matches are played on the parks, and at some time or other the public may object to the best part of them being given over to football or other sports. As it is, there is already a strong feeling in some quarters against charges for admission being made to certain portions. Under the circumstances, the Union would be acting wisely by at once taking up this question of providing the clubs with grounds, for in a few years the land may not be available except at prohibitive cost. But reverting to this matter of professionalism again, would not its adoption mean that there could be no connection in any way between the English and New South Wales unions? Well, what if it does, was the reply. It would be a pity in one way, but if we are going to have rugby at all, let us have it under Australian conditions. We must think of those of our boys who have not been born with silver spoons in their mouths. The raising of this professional team, which is going to England, has been a great blow to many rugby enthusiasts in New Zealand, but the Union there, by carrying out the same mean, niggardly policy that the unions here have followed, must be held responsible for this new movement. Was it reasonable to ask those young men to absent themselves from their homes for months, perhaps lose their positions, and then expect them, after enriching the New Zealand Union to the extent of thousands of pounds, to rest satisfied with an allowance of 3 shillings a day? This team of All Blacks which is going to England may be the beginning, but I am certain that it will not be the end of professionalism in New Zealand. Again, if there are unions in New Zealand and Australia where the professional element is admitted, what could it matter if those unions were not recognised by the amateur organisations in Great Britain? The professional union in England is far stronger and has far better players than its rival unions. With better players, with the recognition here of this principle, it would be possible to have an interchange of visits between professional teams from New Zealand and England, just as we have now of amateur combinations. At the same time, I would not favour such visits unless they were under boards of control of some sort, which would make pure sport their first consideration. Another thing, it would be all very well if we had pure amateurism, but have we got it here at present? How often do we hear of men playing with a team simply because it is made worth their while in the shape of a situation or some other consideration? Again, when some of our teams are touring, how much in the way of compensation or additional pocket money is charged to managerial expenses? Amateur sport is one of the best things in the world, and I thoroughly believe in it, but if we are to have it, let it be without any subterfuge. Local teams assured. Players sign agreements. From inquiries made yesterday, there seems very little doubt that the All Black professional team will be met by several strong combinations of local players. In fact, it was stated on good authority that numbers of the players have signed agreements to give their services, and if this were not so, it is hardly likely that the New Zealanders would waste their time and money by coming here. Of course, it might be argued that the presence of the team now in Australia may be responsible for Sydney being the rendezvous, but then, if there were no certainty of there being good teams raised here to play them, it would have been just as convenient to have met in New Zealand. Statement by Mr. Hungerford. New South Wales Union alert. Mr. Hungerford, a member of the New South Wales Union, who was seen yesterday, is a strong believer in amateur sport, and the professional movement gets no sympathy from him. If there is any attempt to introduce professionalism, he said, I for one will fight the movement tooth and nail, for it would mean the death of rugby. He, however, intimated that the Union was keenly alive to its responsibilities in the matter, and would take decisive action as soon as it had something definite to go upon. Financial position of the team. Arrangements for a return visit. Wellington, New Zealand, Monday. It has been definitely resolved that the professional football team shall leave for Australia en route to England in the course of a week. It is anticipated that a proportion of the amateurs now on tour in Australia will cast in their lot with the professionals. The report that Gleeson of Napier has been appointed manager is said to be incorrect, but it is a fact that Gleeson will be a playing member. The personnel of the team has been decided upon, except two. It is stated that a good number of players are available for emergencies. The financial position of the team is said to be exceptionally good, and all possible calls will be met with ease, quite apart from the prospective gate takings. It is reported here that arrangements will probably be made for a tour of a New South Wales professional team to Yorkshire in 1908. It is the intention of the New Zealanders, when in England, to arrange for a visit to Australia and New Zealand in 1909 of a team representing the Northern Rugby Union. Professional football. Any change that strikes at the roots of our national sports touches most of us in a vital point, and it is clear from the comment on the mere rumour of a coming professionalism in football that this subject will arouse much more heated controversy than would the fall of a federal ministry or a state election. As yet, professionalism in football is an empty threat that may very well fail to realise itself, but the talk of its possibility has brought to the surface an undercurrent of feeling familiar enough to those who follow the game closely, and which is all the better out in the open and faced fairly. The specious pleas that may be offered on behalf of professionalism in any sport are many and varied as those who might presume to share in the gate money, and the reasoning of its supporters will, it is to be expected, appeal to not a few. We are told that we shall be making no real change, that we shall only at last be calling things by their right names, and that in fact many clubs pay directly or indirectly for the services of their players. Of course, there is some truth in this charge, but such insidious happenings at their worst fall far short of outright professionalism, and they do not affect the amateur status and self-sacrifice of the immense bulk of players. Again, it is easy to accuse the Metropolitan Union of not offering a fair deal, and there will no doubt be malcontents to catch at this argument, and the only reply is that the Union is human and does its best. It is a thousand pities that there should be so much of this feeling ready to fly to the surface. The statement is probably exaggerated that a majority of club players would abandon their amateur status as soon as professional terms, with a share in the gate money, were formed, but allowing for exaggeration, it is plain that amateurship is not recognised for the sacrosanct thing it is. The moment a money interest enters a game, it begins to fall prey to a host of evils. It is this precisely that has done so much harm to the turf. In football especially, professionalism has proved a curse wherever it has been allowed to get the upper hand. It destroys the instinct of legitimate sportsmanship very quickly for the player, and it teaches the onlooker as quickly to mistake the play for a contest of gladiators, hired at that. The best thing about our English sports, apart from their intrinsic healthfulness, is that they maintain for us in after life the traditions of the great public school, and extend those traditions into every grade of society. But that indefinable sportsmanship ever withers at the taint of professionalism. It is said that there is room for the amateur and professional side by side. This is precisely what there is not. Mr. Peyton well indicates the poor lookout financially for a professional caste, and to divide the players so would be to split rugby into two feeble halves. This is folly in itself, and exceptional folly in the circumstances. Rugby, with all its tenacity, cohesion and prestige, has as much as it can do to hold its own against the Australian game, a game well enough, but not rugby, and the enthusiastic rugbyite who listens to the pleading of the would-be professional will rub his eyes a little later, it may be, to find his sport extinct. End of Part 2. Part 3 of The Birth of Professional Rugby League in Australia. Selections from the Sydney Morning Herald, 1907 to 1908. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Foundation of the New South Wales Rugby League. 7th of August to 13th of August, 1907. Wednesday, 7th of August, 1907. The All Golds. Progress of Professional Rugby. Union adversely criticised. Professionalism is the topic of conversation in rugby football circles at the present time, and within the next fortnight developments of a startling character will probably take place. As soon as the names of the team to meet the New Zealand professional team, or All Golds as they are called, on the 17th inst. And succeeding days are published, those players will be prevented from taking part in the concluding rounds of the grade competitions, and will no longer be allowed to play in union matches with amateurs. A war between the rugby unions and certain players and their supporters will open. How far it will go no one can predict, but the union will fight to the bitter end to uphold the principles of football by amateurs only, and in this respect they will receive the support of the general public. To test the question, the first move on the part of the union will probably be to put the final of the 2 first grade matches on the Sydney Cricket Ground on the 24th inst., which is the second day of the professional match on the agricultural ground. The public will then have an opportunity of patronising either amateur or professional football. It is considered that such a test would give the union some idea how far the public are with them in their determination to kill professional football in its initial stages. But the question arises, what has brought about all this trouble in the midst of a rugby boom? In nearly every case the fingers of those who answer point to the rugby union and what is termed its greed. Several first-grade players yesterday spoke bitterly of the desire on the part of the union officials to have a big bank balance without taking into consideration the fact that the players provide the sport and they should be encouraged. These players are connected with various clubs, and the spirit of rivalry for local distinction and supremacy has been the keynote of their energy and enthusiasm. There is friendly rivalry on all sides, but the union, it is claimed, has killed that rivalry by dragging the leading clubs out of their own districts Saturday after Saturday in order to provide gate money. The Sydney Cricket Ground was obtained by the Rugby Union for 12.5% of the day's takings, while on such grounds as the University Oval they would have had to pay 33%. Throughout this season, the University Club has provided the sport Saturday after Saturday at the Sydney Cricket Ground to help swell the funds of the Union, while at the same time an inferior match was being played at the University Oval which did not draw an audience sufficient to do little more than pay working expenses. The University men, who are as true and loyal amateur sports as are to be found anywhere, naturally have a warm interest in the welfare of the University Oval, and seeing that they have been this season well up in the competition, they would naturally have preferred their ground should have received a share of the earnings brought about through them. Instead of this, they have provided football for the benefit of the Rugby Union and the trustees of the Sydney Cricket Ground, and at the same time compelled the thousands of supporters resident in the western suburbs to travel right across the metropolis to witness their own representatives playing. What applies to the University Club applies equally to all the electorates, in many of which are grounds. These have to be maintained, and it is the local footballers and cricketers who are looked to draw the public. Each club vies with the other, not only in combating for supremacy, but in helping along their local grounds. In the past they have been encouraged to do this by the Cricket Association. A general feeling prevails that, instead of spending £13,000 on the purchase of Lily Bridge grounds, the Rugby Union should have voted year by year a sum to different clubs to enable them to provide what was required for upkeep and maintenance, and equally distribute the leading games each Saturday over those grounds provided with proper seating accommodation, such as the Rushcutter Bay Oval, Wentworth Park, Erskineville Oval and North Sydney Oval, in addition to the Sydney Cricket and Sports Grounds. Had it done so, there would have been a spirit of contentment and no cry for professionalism. Last year the players had to pay their own expenses into the country, and until late this year, if a player was hurt, he had to do the best he could for himself. Now the clubs go into the country, have actual expenses paid, and by arrangement with an insurance company, Players injured are assisted while they are incapacitated from work. It is claimed, however, that it was hard work to get even these concessions, as the sole aim of the Rugby Union has been to hoard up money. By transferring play to Lillie Bridge, the best clubs will leave their districts every Saturday. Local interest will be killed, and instead of electoral football, Sydney will have Lillie Bridge football. Some of the broad-minded players, who are also sound amateurs, demand that the Union should retrace its steps and save the situation. Possible action by the New South Wales Union. Inquiries made of the Secretary, Mr. W. W. Hill, last night, failed to elicit definite information regarding possible action by the New South Wales Rugby Union. Still, it is certain that some action is contemplated by members of the Union, having as its object the signing of a declaration by each individual member of the New South Wales team that he will not take part in any matches against the New Zealand professional team. The dates set down for the 3 matches on the agricultural ground are August 17, 21 and 24. Various sums have been mentioned as inducements to secure the promise of prominent players to figure in the field against the coming professionals, but in many cases the amount is considered not big enough. One player of promise remarked that £25 for 3 matches and certain disqualification was not good enough for him. An official of one first-grade club said his team would go over as a whole and play in the partial professional manner adopted by leading cricketers if the movements were placed on a firm basis. The Metropolitan Union. Remedy for disaffection. Mr. H. D. Wood, President of the Metropolitan Rugby Union, stated yesterday that if the clubs were not satisfied with the administration of affairs, they had the remedy in their own hands. Each club elected 3 delegates to the Union, one of whom also acted on the committee. The latter elected the various officers, including the Secretary and Treasurer, so that the administration of the funds rested with them. He thought that it would be found that after all a few disaffected spirits were responsible for the outcry. Mr. Wood said he was strongly opposed to the introduction of professionalism, not only on principle, but because it would also mean the breaking of the relations existing between the football authorities here and the amateur organisations in Great Britain and New Zealand. Thursday, 8th of August 1907. The All Golds. Progress of Professionalism. Interview with Sealing. Matters in connection with the possible secession from the amateur ranks were yesterday widely discussed. It is generally admitted that the feeling in favour of some alteration in the government of the game has taken deep root, though the direction which any movement will take is still a matter of conjecture. It is generally felt that it would be impossible for the one governing body to control the amateur and the professional, and both to meet in one team. All sorts of revelations are promised, one being that 4 clubs, and no fewer than 90 men, were prepared to secede from the amateur ranks. Asked as to the statement that he was one of the selectors of the New Zealand professional team, Mr. C. Sealing, one of the Auckland representatives, said it was not a fact, and he had cabled to New Zealand to that effect. I was approached in the matter, and that is all. It is a gross libel, he added. There is not likely to be any trouble in connection with Saturday's match, because of some of the present team joining the professionals. You can take my word for it that the list cabled from New Zealand is almost entirely wrong. It has been cabled that 6 of the present team have been selected to go with the professional team. It is not so. There may perhaps be 1, but no more. The whole of the team have booked their passages home again. Francis, Cunningham, Gillett, Hughes and probably Nicholson will leave for Auckland direct on Wednesday. The rest of the team will leave immediately after the match on Saturday. I do not think professional football would succeed in New Zealand. It might in Sydney. In New Zealand the attendances at club matches are very small. 500 or 600 is a good crowd at a club match in Auckland. Mr. Sealing remarked that it was not his intention to follow up the game. He was retiring for good. He did not intend to take any more rinks. The team had all suffered in health since their arrival in Sydney, and at Brisbane every member, without exception, had dengue fever or influenza. Gillett, though not well, could play wing forward on Saturday, but MacDonald, who received a severe injury to his back, would stand down. Several members of the team, he said, himself included, had not shown their true form during the trip. Union optimistic. A meeting of the Council of the New South Wales Rugby Union was held last night, and at its close the Secretary, Mr. W. W. Hill, intimated that the Council was satisfied that there was no suspicion of professionalism attaching to members of the New South Wales team, nor the New South Wales members of the Australian team. Views of supporters. JGD writes expressing his belief that the entrance of the professional system means the decay of rugby. Outside a certain interested section, he adds, the vast majority of people are strongly opposed to our present winter pastime being degraded into a money-grabbing business for the benefit of a few alleged sportsmen, who care little about the interests of rugby, but a great deal about the welfare of themselves. However, from their mercenary action, good will spring, the rapid advancement of the Australian game of football. Friday, 9th of August, 1907. Professional team. Reported recantation. Wellington, Thursday. It is reported locally that matters in connection with the formation of the professional football team for England have taken an unexpected turn. Information has been received that all the Auckland members of the team now in Australia, who it was reported had signified their intention of joining the professional team, have now declared their intention of returning to New Zealand and remaining amateurs. The executive of the professional team profess themselves unperturbed. It is stated that the vacancies will be filled by the selection of equally good men. At least one of the team now in Australia is understood to be still determined to join the professionals. Gundagai, Thursday. Much interest is being taken in district football circles over the proposed professional rugby in Sydney. The unanimous feeling here is against the proposal, and a motion supporting the head of the union fighting the professional movement is to be moved at the next meeting of the South Western Rugby Union. Saturday, 10th of August 1907. Professional Rugby. 8 clubs represented. New South Wales Football League. A meeting of players and others interested in the professional movement was held at Bateman's Crystal Hotel on Thursday evening. The chair was occupied by Mr. Hoyle. There were about 50 present, including a number of first-grade players, no fewer than 5 captains being amongst those in attendance. 8 senior clubs were represented, the remaining 3 being University, Manly and Western Suburbs. The Manly Club is away on a tour of the rivers. Before business was entered upon, all present had to sign a document agreeing to play against the New Zealand professional team shortly to visit Sydney. The matches are set down for August 17th, 21st and 24th on the agricultural ground. It was resolved to form a body called the New South Wales Football League. Matters in connection with the project were discussed at length, the general tone being that members were not to go in for out-and-out professionalism, but simply to make good out-of-pocket expenses. A selection committee was appointed consisting of 3 who are captains of first-grade clubs. It is stated on good authority that some leading players and supporters have received intimation from their employers that they must either forego their positions or professionalism. The question of grounds occupied some attention. There are 3 grounds mentioned as available for the new league next season, viz. Wentworth Park, Agricultural Ground, and Hampden Oval. The organisers of the movement are Mr. J. Giltinan and a prominent cricketer. New Zealand Professional Team. Wellington, Friday. 15 members of the professional football team left for Sydney by the Warrimoo this evening. They were Pearce, Turtill, Lavery and McGregor, Canterbury, Wrigley, Masterton, A. H. Baskerville, R. Callum, E. Lyle, A. Gilchrist, and E. Watkins, Wellington; Cress, Byrne, Wright, Tyne, and Kelly, Petone. The final selection will be made in Sydney. It is suggested that more than one amateur of the All Blacks may yet join the professionals. Monday, 12th of August, 1907. The Professional Movement. The professional rugby teams were widely discussed on Saturday in town and out at the Sydney Cricket Ground. It was thought that there might be a number of alterations in the Australian team, but happily those anticipations did not prove correct. The players who attended the meeting on Thursday night at Bateman's Crystal Hotel were asked to sign the following agreement before the meeting opened. I hereby agree, if selected by the controllers, to play rugby football against the New Zealand professional team at Sydney in any or all of the 3 matches on August 17th, 21st and 24th next respectively. It is expected that all information will be shortly available as to the teams, and the New South Wales Rugby Union will then take action. Rugbyite writes: There have been several interesting letters appearing in your columns of late, pointing out the alleged awfulness of the advent of professionalism in rugby. The writers and the public should not lose sight of the fact that the unions are to a great extent guilty, inasmuch as they scoop in all the spoil, and certainly do not believe in that judicious policy of give and take. In the event of a player being injured, and in nearly every match there are injuries, in some cases of a serious nature, the unions, to quote the words of many of the players, are most niggardly in the matter of medical expenses and any other incidentals, only paying the bare costs, and in some instances not that. Players are beginning to arrive at the conclusion that there is little or nothing to be gained by their risking life and limb for the sport-loving fraternity, and to gratify the monetary gluttony of the rugby unions. The unions are wholly to blame for the present state of affairs. If they do not meet players in the matter of expenses more liberally, professional rugby is sure to come. The public must also not lose sight of the fact that rugby is not the only game of football. We have the Australian game making strides in our midst, and which game is played almost universally in the other states, and if the conscience of the sport-loving public will not allow them to watch professional rugby, then they can cheer themselves hoarse by supporting and watching the truly national game. Clean Sport writes: In your issue of Tuesday 8th instant, Mr. Hungerford says he will fight professionalism with tooth and nail, at the same time knowing a leading member of one leading team to have received a certain sum to visit Queensland to play in the second Test match. Mr. Alex Knox writes: As a non-partisan, I have read with great interest the discussion appearing in your columns regarding the new phase of rugby football, and must express my concurrence in the proposed change, it appearing to me that the players have not hitherto received from the Metropolitan Rugby Union the consideration to which they are entitled. I am further of the opinion that the new idea will in no way lower the standard of play, but must tend to elevate it. I would suggest that the new league enlist the support of honorary members from the outside public. Tuesday, 13th of August, 1907. Professional football. Players selected. Reprisals against employers. A 1908 English tour. A meeting of the newly formed Professional New South Wales Rugby League was held at Bateman's Hotel last evening. Mr. H. Hoyle, President, occupied the chair, and among those present were Mr. J. J. Giltinan, Secretary, Mr. Victor Trumper, and about 30 players, including Messenger, Eastern Suburbs, Graves, Captain, Balmain, Hennessy, South Sydney, Hamill, Captain, Newtown, Abercrombie, Vice-Captain, North Sydney, Burden, Captain, Sydney, T. Costello, ex-Australian Captain, Henlon, ex-interstate player, Hutchinson, late Balmain, T. O'Donnell, Balmain, Brackenrig, Eastern Suburbs, Rosenfeld, North Sydney, Lutcher, North Sydney, Cheadle, Newtown; P.J. McNamara, Late Eastern Suburbs; Glanville, North Sydney; P. Mayor, Glebe. All the clubs were represented, with the exception of Western Suburbs and University. Mr. J. J. Giltinan, in course of an explanation of the aims of the League, said that they would not be professionals in the strict sense of the term. It was intended to pay the men their travelling expenses and for loss of time from work. To be a good sport, one's hand had to be frequently in one's pocket, and this was also to be provided for. They intended to help old footballers by putting them on the gates and making them line umpires, paying them for their services in either case. If they became strong enough, they hoped to establish pensions. Then they could use their influence, as well as the other unions, to secure billets for players. But they would not, when a man changed his mind and went over to the other side, use that influence to get that man thrown out of his billet. Cheers. He mentioned the name of one man who would have played in Saturday's match if he had backed down, and now it was said that if he played against the professional All Blacks he would lose his job. If he does, continued the speaker, well, he can come to me, and I'll give him a billet myself. Cheers. Regarding the Epping ground, he would like to say that if the Metropolitan Rugby Union offered sufficient inducement, the League would probably rent it from them next year. They would not have enough grounds to play on. Laughter. They intended to fully insure all their players, and he would say, by the way, that the MRU would not have made any move in that direction had they not got a hint as to what the League intended to do. Hear, hear. But the League would not give the injured man 1 guinea a week, but just double that. He urged the men to stick to their guns, and hoped to be able to hand over a bumper cheque to the new clubs after the forthcoming matches. Mr. Trumper, who was acting with him in this matter, was one of their straightest men. They did not look to make anything out of the venture. They spent their money as sports, and if they lost, that was their lookout. However, they wanted the men to back them up, and he was sure that when the time came they would not object to the promoters taking out the little dividend they had put into the venture. He had written to England trying to arrange for a team to leave Australia in 1908, so that they could also hold out the inducement of a trip to the old world, though not on a 3 shillings a day basis. Cheers. The men would get a certain percentage of the gate, and if they came back with £200 in their pockets, well and good. Cheers. They were going to select 19 men for Saturday's match, but they would not publish the names of the other players who had signed on yet, so that they might be able to play for their clubs on Saturday. Mr. Giltinan announced that he had engaged the Town Hall for Thursday night for a public reception of the All Blacks. The chairman said that in view of the threats by employers to dismiss men who played for the League, they wanted it to be understood that any man so dismissed would be supplied with funds to take up a case at law against the employer. But in the case of threatened dismissals, if the player would lay the matter before the executive, they would interview the employer and put their side of the case before him. Mr. F. Henlon, ex-international player, in sympathising with the League, said that he felt sure that in the old days men were paid to play the game, and that there was no talk about it, and why not? Mr. George Boyce, who recently retired from the MRU Referees Association, explained the steps taken to form a referees' union in connection with the League. 90% of the MRU Association would join the new body in consequence of the disqualification that existed. It was intended to place all active referees on the list for selection for representative matches. Referees would be allowed their uniform, travelling expenses and out-of-pocket expenses, the same as the players. At a committee meeting subsequently held, the following 20 players were selected to go into training for the matches against the New Zealand professional team. Backs: C. Headley, Glebe; J. Stunts, Eastern Suburbs; H. Messenger, Eastern Suburbs; E. Fry, South Sydney; F. Cheadle, Newtown; A. Rosenfeld, Eastern Suburbs; L. Dalpouget, Eastern Suburbs; W. Farnsworth, Newtown; and J. Hickey, Glebe. Forwards: R. Mabel, Eastern Suburbs; A. S. Hennessy, South Sydney; H. Hamill, Newtown; S. Pearce, Eastern Suburbs; P. Moyer, Glebe; W. Cann, South Sydney; R. H. Graves, Balmain; H. Brackenrig, Eastern Suburbs; H. Glanville, North Sydney; A. Dobbs, Balmain; E. Courtney, St. George. The selectors were R. Burden, Sydney; A. Hennessy, South Sydney; and R. Graves, Balmain, assisted by H. Messenger, Eastern Suburbs. The team will be coached by R. Burden. The training quarters are the Agricultural Ground, and operations will begin this evening, and will be continued on Wednesday and Friday. It was stated last night that one of the above players would receive £50 for playing in 3 matches. To the Editor of the Herald. Sir, It seems to have been taken for granted by certain people that because a number of players here are willing to meet and play the New Zealand professional team for England, the sport is threatened with dire consequences. One would be led to believe by what has appeared in the press that professional rugby was first heard of when a team was formed in New Zealand. The fact that the game flourishes in England under professionalism, and that this all-black combination will meet the most famous players in the old country, is completely ignored. England is the home of rugby, and there is a larger section of the public support the game under the system by which the players draw expenses, than the section which supports the pure amateur element. It has been stated that all sport goes down when the players are paid any form of remuneration for their services. Well, rugby in England directly disproves this, as also does first-class cricket there and in Australia. If paying the players ruined the game, where would our chance of playing England at cricket be? Every player worth picking has had his share of the gate abroad, and a fat fee for expenses at home. Supposing the worst comes to the worst, and a new union is formed, which will pay proper expenses to the men and treat a player liberally when he is required, is it not likely that the game will be strengthened here? The hide-bound Metropolitan Rugby Union has always neglected the good rule that the strength of the clubs should be the basis of the whole management. If a new union is prepared to give the clubs under its wing better treatment, then the present union must follow suit. The consequence would be that rugby would soon be on an improved wicket all round. Still keener interest would be aroused, and the game would be more liberally patronised. It is well known that the players who are willing to join the new movement do not ask, nor will they receive, more than fair expenses and proper attention when hurt. Yet attempts are being made to brand them as renegades to the good old game, and sports who are only out for what they can make. Surely the public, to whom so many appeals are being made on behalf of the unions, must see that these men have a perfect right to resent the shabby treatment they have received. It would be a fine thing, no doubt, if every player could afford to neglect his work and travel on 3 shillings and 4pence per day. But who is to keep the pot boiling while the worker is away playing the noble game and drawing thousands of pounds to a central exchequer? It is an open secret that while the All Blacks were making Great Britain ring with their exploits, some of the families dependent on players were almost starving in New Zealand. How much semi-professionalism there has been in rugby in New South Wales it is of course impossible to say, but what there has been distinctly unfair. It is only when a man who is wanted badly refuses to go on that arrangements are made to meet him. The most common form of semi-professionalism is finding billets for special players, and it is a significant fact that, according to the papers, certain players have been threatened with the loss of their billets in the event of their playing against the professional All Blacks. What employer who really requires the services of a man will dismiss him for changing the conditions under which he plays football? I am confident that the public will take a fair view of the case for the players, and that they will attend to see a good game, with an all-black combination that is setting out to take on the best team in England. I am, etc., James J. Giltinan, ONSEC, New South Wales Rugby Football League. End of Part 3. Part 4 of The Birth of Professional Rugby League in Australia. Selections from the Sydney Morning Herald, 1907 to 1908. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The All Blacks arrive. 14th of August to 16th of August, 1907. August the 14th, 1907. The Football Crisis. Union versus League. A willing game. Who will win? The publication of the names of the team to meet the New Zealand professional combination may be taken as the kick-off in the great match, Union versus League. Both sides are confident, and besides claiming that they have the support of the best footballers, contend that the public are with them. The question as to the latter claim will no doubt be settled on Saturday, when the League will make its debut by pitting its strength against a team selected from the cream of New Zealand, as one of the visitors described the professional combination yesterday. As to the ability of the players supporting the new venture, that will remain unknown until the names of the men are published. So far, 138 first-grade players have declared themselves in favour of the League, but at a meeting attended by the majority of them, it was decided not to disclose the names until the movement took a more definite shape. From the attitude adopted by the representatives of the two bodies yesterday, it would appear that the League was going to make the game willing from the start, while the Union intends to play a waiting game and trust to its fullback, amateurism, to defend the goal. The All Golds seemed to recognise that the contest they had entered into was going to be a hard-fought one, while on the other hand their opponents, who have been dubbed the Lily Whites, think that the affair is hardly worthy of notice, calling the League a 9 days' wonder. The public who are being appealed to for a decision appear to be pretty well divided on the matter, although the general feeling amongst followers of the game is that the crowd will go where the best football is to be seen. Each club has its following of supporters, and if half the players go over to the League, it is more than likely that they will take their proportion of barakas with them. For instance, the Eastern Suburbs followers, almost to a man, may be looked on to give their attention to the match played on the agricultural ground, in which their idol, Messenger, together with 7 of his club mates, will participate. The members of the newly formed League object to being called professionals. Speaking on the subject yesterday, Mr. Giltinan, the secretary of the movement, said that the Union was making a great song about keeping the professional player out of the game. He contended that the League did not aim at establishing a system whereby a footballer could make a living at the sport. What they really wanted to do was to see that a man was paid his out-of-pocket expenses and reimbursed for any monetary loss he sustained through playing in a match. He would also be given liberal expenses while travelling, and paid well if he happened to be incapacitated through injuries received during a match. There was no intention on the part of the founders of the League to split the money up amongst the players. After providing for the contingencies mentioned, anything left over would be devoted to furthering the interests of the sport, such as by providing training quarters and trainers for the clubs. Referring to the matter of payment, Mr. Giltinan said, "There's one thing I wish you to mention. The rumour has been freely circulated that Messenger is to receive £50 for playing in the 3 matches against New Zealand. I want you to say that I, as Secretary to the League, deny that any such arrangement has been made with the Eastern Suburbs crack. He has received no money, nor has he been promised any beyond his out-of-pocket expenses. That I can make a statutory declaration on if required. The story is a low-down trick of somebody who wants to sow seeds of discontent and distrust amongst our players." The general opinion of members of the Metropolitan Rugby Union is that the new league will disappear like the comet. In fact, they regard the team for Saturday as being so weak that, leaving out Messenger, it is no more than a good second-grade one, not by any means representative of the metropolis, let alone of New South Wales. They assert that it is not the intention of the executive to take any definite steps at present, but rather to let matters work out their own ends. The public, they think, might go next Saturday to the agricultural ground out of curiosity, but once the novelty wears away, the whole thing will settle down, and before long the Football League be a thing of the past. In fact, said one prominent member of the Union, These fellows are out for spoil. One of them has already been promised £50 for this match. If the others don't get that amount also, they will want to know why. A rumpus will take place, and thus a division of the spoils will actually become the lever that will upset the apple cart. No difficulty, it is stated, will be experienced in filling up the vacancies in the teams. The Eastern Suburbs team will probably be weakened the most, but the members of the City and Suburban Union who reside in the Eastern Suburbs have volunteered their services, and each club has also a strong second-grade team to select from. The officials of the Union add that their intention is to wait and act as occasion requires. A full meeting of the Committee of the Union has been called for tomorrow evening. In the meantime, the clubs will act for themselves as usual in the selection of their teams for Saturday's matches. It is pointed out, however, that no member for any club can be pronounced a professional until he has actually played with professionals. That means that not one of the teams selected for Saturday's professional match against New Zealand can be disqualified for life and struck off the membership roll of any club until he actually takes part in that game. It is also asserted that one of the players who was mentioned as a probable professional has intimated that his name was included without his authority, and he has no intention of playing. One or two others are also said to be wavering. The New Zealand Professionals. Arrival of the first batch. The cream of New Zealand. The Wellington detachment of the New Zealand professional team on its way to Great Britain arrived at Sydney yesterday. They were met by the officers of the newly formed league and escorted to the Gresham Hotel, where they will be quartered. The Auckland members of the combination are expected to arrive by the steamer Victoria on Thursday. 15 men came in the Warrimoo. Amongst them was Mr. A.H. Baskerville, the promoter of the tour. In the course of an interview, Mr. Baskerville said that the team consisted of the cream of New Zealand footballers. The movement to send professionals to England was started by him nearly 12 months ago. No sooner, however, did he commence to negotiate with the players than the New Zealand Rugby Union disqualified him for life and refused to allow him on any ground in which a match was being played. This action on the part of the Union gained him a lot of public sympathy. Notwithstanding the difficulties put in his way, he managed to get a team together which he claims is equal to any that has ever left New Zealand. Every one of the men going, he said, are good. There are no has-beens amongst us. The venture was purely a personal one of the members of the team. Each man before he left New Zealand had to deposit £50 to cover his expenses to Great Britain. Some were not able to put up the whole sum, but in these cases one of their mates usually lent them the balance. The names of the full team, as supplied by Mr. A. H. Baskerville, are as follows. Fullbacks: H. Rowe, Auckland, and E. Turtle, Wellington. 3/4: J. Lavery, Christchurch, D. McGregor, Wellington, W. G. Smith, Auckland. 5/8: H. Wynyard, Auckland, W. Wynyard, Auckland, L. Todd, Auckland. Halfbacks: E. Tyne, Wellington, A. Kelly, Wellington, W. Tyler, Auckland. Forwards: C. Byrne, Wellington, E. Watkins, Wellington, C. J. Pearce, Canterbury, H. R. Wright, Wellington, D. Gilchrist, Wellington, T. Cross, Wellington, W. Johnson, Otago, A. Lyle, Wellington, A. Callum, Wellington, W. Trevarthen, Auckland, W. Mackerel, Auckland, C. Dunning, Auckland. Nearly all the members of the team have represented their provinces. Only one of the All Blacks recently in Sydney is in the team. He is W. Johnson, a forward, who made a name for himself by his hard play. The victorious All Blacks who toured Britain last year are represented by D. McGregor, the famous wing 3/4, G. W. Smith, the centre 3/4, and W. Mackerel, who earned distinction in the front row. Yesterday afternoon some of the men went out to the agricultural ground and did a little training. On Thursday night the team will be tendered a public reception at the Town Hall. Thursday, 15th of August, 1907. Football crisis. Rugby Union divided. A liberalising influence. It is not so improbable that the Rugby Union may decide at its meeting this evening to take the wind out of the League's sails by adopting a more generous policy towards its players than has hitherto characterised it. More than one official has expressed the view that the Union's past interpretation of amateurism has been unduly strained, and, as one put it, the action of the League may exert a liberalising influence upon the more conservative members. While the Union may not care to go so far as to dish the League by adopting its policy as a whole, there is a likelihood of proposals being put forward which may lead many players to hesitate before parting company with the body under which they have played in the past. One member of the Union has expressed the opinion that it would be unwise for the Union to take action before Saturday's match, because some of those chosen or who had taken part in the formation of the Football League might come back to the Union's fold. One of the acts of professionalism is asking, receiving, or relying on a promise, direct or implied, to receive any money consideration whatever, actual or prospective. It was pointed out by one official that there was room in the Rugby Union for the exercise of more liberality towards the representative players, and he quoted the case of Dix, the New South Wales full-back. Without stating the amount earned by Dix, it might be said that in return for the salary he is losing, he receives 3 shillings a day, and that is supposed to represent pocket money while away. Considering that Dix has been absent from his home in the New England district almost entirely since May 29th, his football account must show a substantial debit balance. A number of Union officials hold the opinion that there is room for improvement in this direction, and it will probably come in due course. Home team picked. The balance of the New Zealand team are due to arrive today, and this evening the visitors will be welcomed at a smoke concert at the Town Hall. The 15 to meet the New Zealanders were chosen yesterday by Messrs Hennessy, Burden and Graves, and are: Fullback C. Headley, 11 stone 8 pound. 3/4 J. Stunts, 12 stone. E. Fry, 11 stone 1 pound. H. Messenger, 12 stone. F. Cheadle, 10 stone 7 pound. Halves: A. Rosenfeld, 11 stone 1 pound, and L. Dalpouget, 11 stone 6 pound. Forwards: H. Hamill, 12 stone 10 pound. A. P. Hennessy, 12 stone 1 pound. R. Mabel, 11 stone 9 pound. P. Moyer, 11 stone 10 pound. F. Pierce, 13 stone 6 pound. H. Cann, 12 stone 4 pound. H. Graves, 12 stone. H. Brackenrig, 12 stone. Emergencies: H. Glanville, 14 stone 7 pound. A. Dobbs, 12 stone 4 pound. E. Courtney, 12 stone 8 pound. W. Farnsworth, 11 stone. J. Hickey, 11 stone 2 pound. The referee appointed is Mr. G. Boss. Something about the team. The team chosen is a fair one. Several combinations might be chosen equally as good from the clubs in the first grade competition. Still, that might almost be said concerning a representative team of New South Wales. The fullback is Headley, who would no doubt have played fullback for New South Wales and Australia had not Dix been discovered. The 3/4 include Stunts, who put in capital work against Queensland in the second match, the prettiest of the three, also Messenger, about whom there is no need to say anything. He is perhaps the most brainy man of the Australian 15, and Fry and Cheadle have shown good work at times for their clubs. Concerning the 5/8, there is just a chance Messenger may play in the position. Rosenfeld had a few supporters for his inclusion in the rep team. Dalpouget has been in Brisbane. The forwards are a good average lot, both in skill and weight, and they may put up an interesting game against the New Zealanders. They are all men who are well known as triers for their clubs. The early match. The early match on the agricultural ground on Saturday is Newtown vs Sydney, an Australian rules fixture. The fact that rugby and Australian rules engagements will be played on the same ground will no doubt provoke a smile. The All Blacks. Aucklanders' departure. 4 of the Auckland contingent of the All Blacks will leave this morning by the Mokoia, the departure of which boat was deferred from midnight last night until 11 o'clock today. The four are Nicholson, Cunningham, Francis and Gillette. O'Sullivan left on Tuesday night by train for Melbourne, for which city Booth will depart on Sunday. Fryer is up at Muswellbrook, having some shooting. O'Sullivan and Booth will leave by the Miawera on August the 28th for Wellington. Friday, 16th of August, 1907. Football crisis. Metropolitan Union meeting. Waiting for the cat to jump. A meeting of the Committee of the Metropolitan Union was held at the Rooms last night. The chair was occupied by Mr. H. D. Wood. Mr. Logan moved that if there were anything to lay before the meeting regarding the professional movement, it should take precedence of the ordinary business of the meeting. A discussion ensued in which reference was made to an agreement alleged to have been signed by a number of players. The chairman remarked that nothing could be done, an inquiry would have to be held. The players who were said to have broken their amateur status were entitled to be heard. Mr. McMahon said they had no evidence to show whether any agreement had been signed. The chairman ruled that the English Union had given the New South Wales Rugby Union powers to exercise with regard to professionalism. The New South Wales Rugby Union had not delegated those powers to the Metropolitan Union. Therefore it would be necessary to ask the New South Wales Rugby Union to delegate such powers to the Metropolitan Union to carry out the laws in the metropolitan area. A meeting of the New South Wales Rugby Union will be held on Monday. Influences at work. There were rumours yesterday that some of the players who had signed a document to the effect that they would play against the New Zealanders if required had withdrawn from that position, and it was stated that W. Farnsworth and Courtney were not going to play with the league. With regard to Headley, the fullback of the team, the league supporters asserted that his employers are not favourable to his leaving the Union, and if it be a question of losing his billet, he would rather give up the game. The case of Dobbs. An unrehearsed scene was enacted with the Balmain team at Mudgee. Mr. McQuaid, the secretary of the club, explained yesterday that Dobbs had to pay his own fare returning from the tour of the Balmain club. Mr. Armstrong, the manager, who had received instructions from headquarters, would not give him his ticket. Mr. McQuaid wired to his team to come home and not to play at Lithgow, as a protest against the action of the Union. The wire was, "I wish you to return at once, as a protest against the action of Armstrong. Disgraceful." Dobbs was at Mudgee, and Mr. McQuaid states that he had to make arrangements for Dobbs's return. Mr. H. W. J. Howe, secretary of the Metropolitan Union, said, "Dobbs told the manager that he wanted to leave to play with the league team. He was asked if that was all he wanted to go for, and said yes. Dobbs was then told that as he had not completed the tour, and his only excuse was to go to Sydney to play with the professionals, he would have to pay his own expenses. We have," concluded Mr. Howe, "already had to send a man to fill his place in the team. Coleman leaves on Friday." Mr. P. McQuaid brought the matter of the return of Dobbs before the meeting of the Metropolitan Union last night. He reported that the Balmain club had gone on a tour and that Dobbs was left stranded at Mudgee. Mr. McMahon: "How was he left stranded?" Mr. McQuaid: "His name appeared in the paper, and he wanted to come home." The chairman thought the better plan for Mr. McQuaid to follow would be to write into the Union and make a complaint. Mr. Dent said that there was a report that Dobbs wanted to play with the professional team. Mr. McMahon asked if Mr. McQuaid would give the meeting an assurance that he had nothing to do with the movement. Mr. McQuaid: "I have too much to do to mix with any professional movement." All Blacks welcomed. Footballers as white slaves. Allegations of sweating. The visiting All Blacks were welcomed to the vestibule of the Town Hall last night at a smoke concert under the auspices of the New South Wales Rugby Football League. The visiting team entered shortly after 8 o'clock and were accorded a great ovation by the 490 persons present. The cheering was persisted in till it reached almost a deafening roar. The All Blacks were clearly delighted with the reception, and took their seats along the front rows, blushing like schoolboys. The New South Wales team filed into the room next, and the cheering was renewed. Messenger was specially singled out for a demonstration, but that player was shy of taking compliments, and found a seat as quickly as possible. The outbursts of enthusiasm having subsided, an excellent musical programme was given, Mr. L. de Grön playing the accompaniments. Mr. Harry C. Hoyle, during an interval in the music, tendered the New Zealanders a hearty welcome. He hoped their tour would be pleasant, and that they would be successful. The new league had been twitted with having ulterior motives. As a fact, they had formed their leagues, both here and in New Zealand, as a protest against the unfair conditions under which rugby players had previously laboured. They believed it was unfair for men to bring thousands of pounds to the gates and then be treated as white slaves. They were doing what they believed to be right, were acting within the four corners of the law, and would trouble the other side to mind his own business. Applause. The leagues had been formed to help along football. Out of the gate money the players were to be paid sufficient to keep up the dignity of the game, and their own dignity during their visits to other centres. Applause. They felt that they had right on their side, with the public behind them, and were prepared to fight their opponents to the finish. Applause. The public would be convinced that the league was in the right, working on straight lines, and in the best interests of the game. Applause. The visitors were then greeted with 3 cheers. Mr. Baskerville, promoter of the New Zealand team, and Mr. Palmer, its manager, briefly returned thanks. Mr. Palmer said that the players on their side were not actuated by any mercenary motives. Cheers. The Rugby Union of New Zealand had brought the trouble upon itself, and judging by the celerity with which the league had been got together in Sydney, he took it they had been treated pretty badly too. He hoped to see the All Blues in New Zealand. Their visit would be a success, and he would be prepared personally to put up a guarantee of £1,000. The New Zealanders then mounted the stage, and returned the greeting in Maori. "For they are jolly good fellows," was given thus: Tenei te tangata, pairawa ata, eki anamato katoa, tenei te tangata, pairawa ata, eki anamafo katoa. Hippy, hippy, hooray! The team to represent New Zealand tomorrow will not be selected until today. The Aucklanders are not expected to arrive until this morning, and a rough trip may mean that some who would otherwise be chosen may have to stand down. Mr. Baskerville, the manager, was spoken to last night concerning a rumour about town that Messenger was going with the New Zealanders, and he replied, "How could he go as a New Zealander?" Wednesday's matches. The New Zealanders will put 2 teams in the field next Wednesday. One will be against New South Wales, and the other will meet a team not yet decided upon. There will be 32 New Zealanders available. End of Part 4.